Hi darlings, and welcome to the third video of the channel. As you can tell from just the title, the discussion on systemic racism is far from over. In fact, my previous video barely scratched the surface. Sadly, this video is going to be on the shorter side because I have a bit of a sore throat going. I promise you it's not coronavirus. It's either allergies or acid reflux. So before I get going and hopefully provide more suggestions, I'm just gonna take a quick swig of water. Hydration is key. And we're gonna talk about different angles on addressing racism and what you could do to dismantle it. So first, when I heard the term All Lives Matter, I really thought it was like maybe some new form of intersectional feminism, but I could not have been any more wrong. It's completely racist and it takes away from the issue at hand. You may have heard this a lot this week, but if your house was on fire or you broke a bone and emergency services were to come in and just say, hey, all houses matter, or all bones matter, and they don't even fix or put out the fire, you would be very upset. So with that being said, All Lives Matter takes away from who's really hurting right now, which is Black lives. That's why we have these rallies. That's why we have to continue the uncomfortable discussion. BLM is not a trend. And another factor is where I've seen people who were hesitant to speak up or kind of just didn't talk about and kept quiet is because they were members of other underprivileged groups, such as being poor, female, LGBTQ+, not identifying as their assigned gender, not being Christian, and having a disability. And I understand where it's hard, where maybe you're putting all your passion into ending those disadvantages, but if you have white privilege, you should use that to help fight for people who are Black and also are part of those groups, because they face way more barriers, and let me tell you, it's really screwed up and we need to do something about it. So here's the thing. I cringe when I hear people say things like, I don't have white privilege, I grew up poor. And I get it, it's hard. I mean, feeling like you have to catch up to your peers just to fit in. But that's not the main issue here. So what I'm gonna ask you is, if you were a family member, were able to get a financial loan or assistance, or you had a recruiter call you back just because of your name, then you do have white privilege. People who are Black, sadly, are less likely to receive financial loans, and even their grandparents were unable to receive financial loans due to redlining. And 50% of recruiters choose to call applicants back just by their name. And I was quite horrified to see that. So if you and a family member were able to receive loans, or you did have recruiters calling you back, you have white privilege, and you got to use that to fight for neighborhood reform. Next, let's talk about biological specs, particularly being a female, which I can tell you is really hard. We, as females, make 78 cents for every dollar a man makes. There's little to no support with sexual assault. Our health needs are misunderstood due to asinine laws. And it's really hard to find a cute and decent outfit with pockets. I consider myself a feminist, so I have no problem ranting about these topics at any given moment. However, being a feminist is more than focusing on the issues that affect me, a white woman. We have to be intersectional feminists by addressing all the facets, such as racism, classism, and ableism. So, if you consider yourself a feminist, support all women. Not just white cisgender women, but women of color, transgender women, gender non-conforming women. You gotta support them all. So as you've noticed, like in the news where a white woman is murdered, like every media outlet covers it. But when a black woman is murdered by a white supremacist, nobody really talks about it. And it needs to be discussed more so we could address the issue of racism. We are in the third wave of feminism. It needs to be intersectional. The first wave, which was about getting the right to vote, a lot of these women, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they believe white women should have had the right to vote before black men. And I took that as a surprise after doing my 8th grade Civil War project on Lucretia Mott, but that's something they do not teach you in middle school. So we need to expand our education, show that these historical figures who have statues were racist, and also show how it exists today. So to all my fellow feminists, not only just fight for the rights of white women, you gotta fight for the rights of all women, especially transgender women, which brings me to the next topic of the LGBTQ plus community. And I have seen a lot go down with trying to make it more inclusive for people of color, like the rainbow flag. They tried adding like black and brown stripes, which I thought would have looked really cool, but that went down the drain. But it's still important to be aware of what black members of the LGBTQ plus community face. For example, black men who identify as gay or bisexual in the South are more likely to die from AIDS complications due to how the disease is still stigmatized, and they are less likely to access adequate health care due to systemic racism. There's also the issue of violence faced particularly by black transgender women. So I just want to point out that the number of cases continues to grow. Just this week, we lost Rhea Milton and Dominic Remy Fells, and they were the 13th and 14th murders of transgender or gender non-conformists just this year. And let's also not forget about Tony McCade, a black transgender man who was killed by law enforcement on May 27th. And I understand it's difficult because of religious reasons, but again, a lot of our laws were kind of based on Christian values, and if you're a Christian, hate to admit it, yeah, you're privileged, but we're going to talk about that. So yes, religious oppression. You may think things are fine and dandy now, but they're not. Just in 2017, when Trump first went into office, he enforced a ban on travelers from predominantly Muslim nations. And according to the Pew Research Center, 1 out of 5 U.S. Muslims are black, in which 49% of them have converted. Islamophobia is still present, especially in England, where a 12-year-old girl was killed by drowning last year. Her name was Shakri Abdi, and her family is still seeking justice to this day. Let's also not forget about anti-Semitism. It's still present. We have black people who are Jewish, and neo-Nazis, they still run rampant. It's quite scary. It's quite disgusting. And I'm honestly shocked that America hasn't done anything to outlaw these symbols and hate speech, yet in Germany, it is. I understand how hard it is to not identify as Christian, whether you dropped the beliefs when you're older, you converted upon being the love of your life, or you just weren't raised that way. And I could see where it's hard to talk about it in fear of being scrutinized. I get that the First Amendment covers religious freedom as well, but I question it due to the violence that still occurs today. And the last area I'm going to discuss is disability rights. And that's one area in feminism I'm particularly passionate about, due to the fact that I am a person with disabilities. I have autism, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and endometriosis. The last two, it's kind of debatable about whether or not they are considered disabilities, and I know lots of endo warriors who have to go to court multiple times just to receive benefits, but I will tell you that those conditions negatively impact your life and daily functioning. And I can go on probably for hours urging people in the same battlefields to fight for your rights and find doctors that listen, but it's going to probably come up vague, and I know I need to do more to help support Black people within those battlefields because they face far more barriers. So in order to be a true advocate for people with disabilities, you'd have to acknowledge the barriers that Black people face and how they're less likely to get those resources, sadly, due to systemic racism. So one thing I was reading about, because I have autism and I had a lot of resources in K through 12. Well, all right, so for example, Black children, when they attend schools that are predominantly white, they are actually more likely to get diagnosed with learning disabilities. But here's where it's really screwed up. They're less likely to get the resources they need due to the cost of them. There's lots of stigmatization, and we all know how cruel kids can be. And some of the teachers were even demonstrated racist behavior. And these disparities are disgusting, especially like when teachers are supposed to value all students and they talk like it, but they don't act like it. And what truly boils my blood is racism in medicine. And this statistic really shocked me, which was that Black patients as a whole are 50% less likely to receive pain medication than white patients due to some harmful stereotypes such as having thicker skin and different nerves. And another one is they're more likely to be wrongly stigmatized as a drug abuser because some medical practices thought that they're more likely to become addicted, which is also really screwed up and just plain wrong. So we need to change the way we train doctors and talk about the troubles that Black patients face. Like, you have to listen to them. So there's many areas where physical disabilities can be discussed, but I'm primarily going to discuss endometriosis because that's something I suffer from, and I know a little bit more about that because of my own battles, but I am here to support my fellow Black endo warriors. Most endometriosis studies are performed using white patients, which is something that creates bias. And I've taken research methodology classes, so that's something that should be brought up when looking at the participants and weaknesses in studies. And I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you that endometriosis is not a geographically based genetic disorder. Women of all races suffer from it. And we need the studies to be done on more racially diverse patients. More importantly, doctors need to listen to their Black patients. Listen to what they're saying and treat them with the same dignity regardless in diagnosis, and give them the same biological treatment you would give them to a white patient. I know that there's so many more areas and sub-areas to cover, but this will do for today. And just like my last video, feel free to provide suggestions to improve activism. And this time, I will donate $1 to the Marsha P. Johnson Institute for every negative comment. And by negative comments, I'm referring to bigotry and deconstructive criticism. So we still have a long ways to go in dismantling racism. Like, we still need to have those uncomfortable discussions with loved ones, tell them that their behavior is not appropriate, set them in their place. So I'm going to say, to conclude, please do not stop fighting and continue to practice concussions because COVID is still rampant. Stay safe, darlings.